Have you ever wondered if your landlord can raise your rent while you're still in the middle of your lease? This is a common question for renters, especially as housing costs continue to rise. In this video, we'll break down the rules and typical scenarios around rent increases during an active lease. We'll look at what your lease agreement means, what the law says, and what you can do if you're faced with a sudden rent hike. Let's start by understanding the basics of a lease and why it's so important for both tenants and landlords. A lease agreement is a legally binding contract between a landlord and a tenant. It outlines the terms and conditions of renting a property, including the rent amount, duration, and responsibilities of each party. Typically, leases last for a set period, such as 12 months, and specify the monthly rent. This agreement protects both sides. It guarantees the tenant a place to live at a set price, and it ensures the landlord receives regular payments. Understanding your lease is the first step in knowing your rights regarding rent increases. Leases generally fall into two categories: fixed, term, and month-to-month. A fixed-term lease locks in your rent and terms for a set period, usually 6 months or a year. During this time, the landlord typically cannot change the rent. On the other hand, a month-to-month lease renews every month, and the landlord can usually raise the rent with proper notice. Knowing which type of lease you have is crucial, as it determines whether your rent can be increased before your lease ends. If you have a fixed-term lease, your rent amount is set for the entire lease period. In most cases, landlords cannot increase your rent until the lease expires. This is one of the main benefits of signing a fixed-term agreement. It gives you financial stability and predictability. However, there are some exceptions, which we'll discuss in the next scenes. For now, remember that your lease is your protection against sudden rent hikes. Sometimes, a lease agreement includes specific clauses that allow for rent increases during the lease. For example, the lease might state that rent can be raised if property taxes or maintenance costs go up. These clauses must be clearly written in your lease. If your lease has such a clause, your landlord must follow the exact process described, including giving you proper notice. Always read your lease carefully to spot any provisions that could allow for a rent increase. A rent escalation clause is a section in your lease that outlines specific conditions under which your rent may increase. This could be tied to inflation, property taxes, or other costs. For example, your lease might say that rent will go up by a certain percentage each year. If your lease includes a rent escalation clause, your landlord can raise the rent according to those terms, even during the lease period. Always check for these clauses before signing. If you're on a month-to-month lease, your landlord has more flexibility to raise your rent. However, they can't do it without warning. Most states require landlords to give written notice, often 30 days before increasing the rent. This gives you time to decide whether to accept the new rent or look for another place. Always check your local laws for the exact notice period required. Rent increase rules can vary widely depending on where you live. Some cities and states have rent control laws that limit how much and how often rent can be raised. Others have no such restrictions. It's important to know your local regulations, as they may offer additional protections or set specific procedures for rent increases. Always research your area's laws or consult a local housing authority if you're unsure. Even if your landlord is allowed to raise the rent, they must give you proper notice. The notice period is usually set by state or local law and is often 30 days, but it can be longer in some places. The notice must be in writing and clearly state the new rent amount and when it will take effect. If your landlord doesn't follow these rules, the rent increase may not be valid. If your lease doesn't mention anything about rent increases, the general rule is that the rent cannot be raised during the lease term. The agreed-upon rent remains in effect until the lease expires. After that, the landlord can propose a new rent amount for the next lease term or for a month-to-month arrangement. Always keep a copy of your lease for reference. Sometimes, landlords try to raise rent in ways that aren't allowed by law or the lease agreement. For example, increasing rent without proper notice or during a fixed-term lease without a valid clause is usually illegal. If you believe your landlord is trying to raise your rent unlawfully, you have the right to challenge it. Document all communications and seek legal advice if needed. If you receive a notice that your rent will go up, don't panic. First, check your lease to see if the increase is allowed. Next, verify that your landlord has given you the required notice. If everything is in order, you can either accept the new rent, try to negotiate, or decide to move. If you think the increase is illegal, you can challenge it through the proper channels. If you're facing a rent increase, it's often possible to negotiate with your landlord. You might be able to agree on a smaller increase, or get additional benefits like repairs or upgrades. Approach the conversation calmly and be prepared to explain your situation. Landlords may be willing to compromise, especially if you're a reliable tenant. Some cities have rent control or rent stabilization laws that limit how much landlords can increase rent, even between leases. These laws are designed to protect tenants from sudden, large rent hikes. If you live in a rent-controlled area, your landlord must follow strict rules about when and how much they can raise your rent. Check with your local housing authority to see if these laws apply to you. Rent increases can be calculated in different ways. Some leases specify a percentage increase each year, while others tie increases to inflation or local cost of living indexes. In rent-controlled areas, the maximum increase is often set by law. Understanding how your rent increase is calculated can help you plan your budget and avoid surprises. When your lease term ends, your landlord can propose a new rent amount for the next lease period. You can accept the new terms, try to negotiate, or decide to move. If you don't agree to the new rent, your landlord may choose not to renew your lease. Always start renewal discussions early to avoid last-minute surprises. It's illegal for a landlord to raise your rent in retaliation for you exercising your legal rights, such as reporting unsafe conditions or joining a tenants' union. If you suspect retaliation, document everything and contact your local housing authority. Retaliatory rent increases are prohibited in most states. Sometimes, landlords try to justify a rent increase by making repairs or upgrades to the property. While improvements can lead to higher rent, the increase must still follow the terms of your lease and local laws. If you didn't request the repairs, you may have grounds to challenge the increase, especially if it's excessive. If your landlord pays for utilities and those costs go up, your lease may allow for a rent increase to cover the difference. This should be clearly stated in your lease agreement. If utilities are your responsibility, a rent increase for higher utility costs is usually not allowed unless specified in the lease. If a rent increase makes your apartment unaffordable, you have a few options. You can try to negotiate with your landlord, look for a roommate, or search for a more affordable place. Some areas offer rental assistance programs for tenants facing hardship. Don't ignore the problem, start exploring solutions as soon as you receive notice. Whenever you discuss rent increases with your landlord, keep a record of all communications. Save emails, letters, and notes from phone calls. Documentation can be crucial if there's a dispute or if you need to prove your case to a housing authority or court. If you believe a rent increase is illegal or unfair, consider seeking legal advice. Many cities offer free or low-cost legal aid for tenants. A lawyer can help you understand your rights, review your lease, and represent you if necessary. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. Tenant unions and advocacy groups can provide support and resources if you're facing a rent increase. These organizations can help you understand your rights, connect you with legal assistance, and even organize collective action if needed. Joining a tenant group can give you more power in negotiations. From a landlord's point of view, rent increases may be necessary to keep up with rising costs, property taxes, or maintenance expenses. Most landlords prefer to keep good tenants and may be open to reasonable discussions. Understanding both sides can help you find a solution that works for everyone. Before signing a lease, read every section carefully, especially those about rent and increases. Look for any clauses that mention rent adjustments, escalation, or additional fees. If you're unsure about any part of the lease, ask questions or seek legal advice. Being informed from the start can prevent surprises later. Some leases include automatic renewal clauses, which mean your lease will continue unless you or your landlord give notice to end it. These clauses may also specify how rent will be adjusted upon renewal. Make sure you understand these terms so you're not caught off guard by a rent increase at renewal time. A few states have laws that limit how much rent can be increased each year, even if there's no rent control. These limits are usually based on a percentage of the current rent. If you live in such a state, your landlord must follow these rules, regardless of what your lease says. If your rent goes up, your landlord may also ask for an increased security deposit. The rules for this vary by state. Some states cap the maximum deposit amount, while others allow landlords to adjust it with rent increases. Check your lease and local laws to see what applies to you. If you believe a rent increase is unfair or illegal, you can challenge it. Start by talking to your landlord and explaining your concerns. If that doesn't work, you can file a complaint with your local housing authority or seek legal help. Be sure to gather all relevant documents and evidence. If you decide not to accept a rent increase, you may need to move out when your lease ends or after the notice period. Make sure to give your landlord proper notice and leave the property in good condition to get your security deposit back. Plan your move early to avoid stress. If you're subletting your apartment, rent increases may affect you differently. The original lease terms still apply, but your sublease agreement may have its own rules. Make sure you understand both agreements and communicate with the original tenant and landlord if there's a rent change. If you share your apartment with roommates, a rent increase affects everyone. Decide together how to split the new rent and update your agreement if necessary. Good communication is key to avoiding misunderstandings and ensuring everyone is on the same page. If you have pets, some landlords may use a rent increase to cover additional wear and tear. This should be specified in your lease. If your landlord tries to raise your rent because of a pet, check your agreement and local laws to see if it's allowed. Sometimes, landlords add new amenities like a gym or laundry room and raise the rent as a result. Any increase for new amenities should be clearly communicated and, ideally, agreed upon in writing. If you don't use the new amenities, you may be able to negotiate the increase. If your lease includes parking, a landlord may try to raise the rent if parking costs go up. This should be addressed in your lease agreement. If parking is a separate contract, the landlord must follow those terms. Always clarify how parking fees are handled before signing. Some leases require tenants to carry renter's insurance. If insurance costs rise, your landlord generally cannot increase your rent to cover it unless your lease allows for such adjustments. Always check your lease for insurance-related clauses. Always ask for a receipt when you pay rent, especially after an increase. Receipts provide proof of payment and the new rent amount. This documentation can be important if there's ever a dispute about what you owe. Many landlords now accept online rent payments. If your rent increases, make sure your online payment portal reflects the new amount. Keep digital records of all transactions for your own protection. If your rent increases, make sure you know the new due date and amount to avoid late fees. Late fees must be reasonable and specified in your lease. If you're unsure, ask your landlord for clarification. If you can't agree on a rent increase, your landlord may choose not to renew your lease. In some cases, you may be able to terminate your lease early if the increase violates the lease terms or local laws. Always check your lease and consult a professional before making decisions. If you decide to move because of a rent increase, remember to budget for moving costs. These can include hiring movers, paying for a new security deposit, and utility setup fees. Planning ahead can help you manage these expenses. Failing to pay increased rent can affect your credit if your landlord reports missed payments to credit bureaus or takes legal action. Always communicate with your landlord if you're having trouble paying, and seek help before falling behind. Your rental history can affect your ability to rent in the future. If you move out because of a rent increase, make sure to leave on good terms and get a reference from your landlord. A positive rental history can help you secure your next home. To sum up, whether your rent can be increased during a lease depends on your lease agreement and local laws. Fixed-term leases usually protect you from increases, unless there's a specific clause. Always read your lease carefully, know your rights, and don't hesitate to seek help if you're unsure. Being informed is your best defense against unexpected rent hikes. Navigating rent increases can be stressful, but understanding your lease and local laws can make the process easier. If you're ever in doubt, reach out to tenant organizations, legal aid, or your local housing authority. Remember, knowledge is power when it comes to protecting your home and your finances.